Exactly. Yeah, we're good. Awesome, we can go. All right, so welcome to this talk on managing your own security career. I'm Mike Murray, with me is Lee Kushner. I'm going to start because we've spent a lot of time as an industry feeling relatively small. And we have been relatively small, at least up until about 2001. And then the CISSP got popular and security became a big deal. And suddenly, we started to see exponential growth in this whole industry. If you just look at the statistic on screen, we've gone from 6,000 CISSPs to 50,000. Basically an order of magnitude change in the last 5 years. That is wild, because what it's done to your career is it's really messed with you. You now have competition where you never did before. Back in the old days, people were clamoring for security people. No one knew where to find them, no one knew what to do about getting them, and when you found them, no one knew how to evaluate the talent. Suddenly, you've got a challenge for every job you go after. And every time you decide you want something, somebody else wants it too. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I'll let Lee tell you a little bit more about himself.
You know, and the truth of the matter is that just by its own definition, the better jobs are more attractive to more people. So every time that we get a very highly skilled profession or a very desirable job, what traditionally happens is that there's a slew of very qualified people for the job. And some of the most difficult phone calls is talking to very qualified people and letting them know that, unfortunately, you were not selected. It's very interesting, but as we've grown in this industry, you see the competition. There's a lot more talented people than there are great positions out there. And I think that during this presentation, we'll talk a little bit more that when the time comes, how do you prepare yourself so you do get that opportunity and that you wind up helping yourself get selected and actually move to the top of the pyramids. But tell you a little bit about myself. I've been working in the information security profession since 1996 as a recruiter. My company, founded in 1999, services the industry, Fortune 500 companies, information security product vendors, information security services vendors, and I think that we've probably had a hand in the building of every managed security service provider that's ever existed on this planet. So it's been very interesting. We see a lot of, talk to a lot of different people with a lot of different perspectives, and you know, the viewpoint is quite unique from my office.
And a bit about me. I'm actually in Infosec. I run the product testing lab for NeoHapsys and work in this industry every day. I ended up doing this kind of talk because I got a little ranty about it on my blog for about 6 months, and then people really liked it. People really liked hearing about it because security is actually a really difficult career to maintain and to get moving. So I end up talking with a lot of people about their own careers and their networks and their personal brands, and you know, Lee and I are friends, and it just makes sense for the two of us to get up and talk.
Yeah, Mike and I met in an elevator at, that sounds kind of strange, but we met in an elevator walking from the Mirage Hotel to the trade show floor at Black Hat about 4 years ago. And, you know, from that conversation, we've just, you know, developed a friendship. And, you know, so the things we're going to talk about today is about, you know, why is information security different? I mean, I think that we've all talked about, you know, in our careers, you know, we always feel a little bit special, but is it really? Now with the markets the way they are and news of cutbacks, how would you recession-proof your career? How would you find your dream job? How do you take responsibility and prepare yourself for your own personal career growth? And then how you brand yourself and how you network and how you piece yourself together so you become more attractive out there in the market space and you differentiate yourself. I think it's important really to understand what an information security career means. It means different things to different people. You know, sometimes it's very much everybody has that different knack of specialization. However, as an industry, we are quite broad. It's an industry where there's a lot of rules. It's an industry where the who you know and the guilt by association, or the attractiveness by association, I think is something that is fairly unique to this industry. A lot of the other things is that careers really become, in information security, just like in other areas, you're always working for somebody. I mean, everybody has some sort of boss or some sort of accountability. And a lot of times it's not necessarily about the company that you work for, but whom you work for. And try to figure about knowing your field, advancing your knowledge, and really, how do I get there quick enough? How do I have my ideas heard? How are my opinions respected? And how does that really help me accomplish the things that drive me personally in my own pursuits?
Where security gets interesting is that it really is different from other places in that it's all about speed. I was listening to Rich Mogul talk this morning, and he was mentioning that really the first public data breach was ChoicePoint. Actually, the first one was Egghead, 2000. The first really big SB 1386 breach was ChoicePoint in 2003. That's only 5 years ago. In 5 years, our industry has changed absolutely radically. How much has software development changed in that same 5 years? A little bit. Ruby on Rails. That's interesting. But if you were a C coder 5 years ago, you're still a C coder today, and you can still get a job. If 5 years ago you didn't know what those, or if today you didn't know what those acronyms are, you're going to have a hard time being a security person. So 5 years is a whole new industry. It's what makes security really difficult. It's what makes maintaining your career really difficult. I know lots of people who 5 years ago were at the top of their game, and today they don't work in security anymore because their skills just don't matter anymore. And so this is a career that's full of such incredible growth. If you're not able to keep up, you're going to get left radically behind. 5 years from now, if you know what you know today, you're going to be completely worthless in the market. Which means, I had to get Fight Club in here somewhere. You guys aren't special. You have to learn all of this, but unlike the old days, and this is where the competition comes in, you're just not special anymore.
Information security as an industry, if you think about it commercially speaking, is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of between 10 and 13 years old. And security has really become a standalone profession at that time. So if you think about that in comparison to other industries, we are definitely immature. And because it's immature, in the beginning, even now, there are probably not enough information security professionals, or let me correct that. There are not enough talented information security professionals. Because even by definition of the earlier slide, the fact that there are 50,000 CISSPs, I don't think that's a result of more qualified people. I think that's a result of great marketing by the folks at ISC Squared. I think that what happens is that security in the past was a growth initiative. A lot of the things were brand new. When there were layoffs or when things get cut, information security was a group that was basically immune to a lot of things. Now when a company like Citigroup says that they're going to lay off 40,000 people, I fairly doubt that no information security professionals are going to be affected by that. Most chief information security officers are forced with the scenario of trying to do a lot more with a lot less budget. And a lot of times what's happening now is that the chief information security officer wind up pushing a lot of the technical functions into other areas of networks, applications, operation systems, those types of things, where security is almost getting blurred in the overall technology stack at a lot of different levels. The chief information security officer, if I talk to 100 of them probably have different stories about how they actually achieved the position that they own. And the truth of the matter is that what's really scary or a little bit disheartening for information security professionals is a lot of these new CISOs aren't coming from traditional information security backgrounds, which I find alarming, because if I'm a professional within this industry, I have to figure if I do everything right, maybe I can get there. But the truth of the matter is that there are no clear definitions about what everything right is. And as more and more people fight for these jobs, it's up to you as the professional that you have to be better than you were before. You have to be able to answer all the questions. You have to be able to stay on top of the game so you continue to get recognized, so you continue to be heard. And so when the time comes to be tapped on your shoulder to say, hey, who's the best person qualified for this promotion, that you're the one that people think of.
In fact, what it comes down to is standing out from the crowd. And while there's a huge number of CISSPs, as Lee mentioned, there aren't necessarily a huge number of really great security people out there. And so the question comes down to, how do you stand out? Especially in a situation where we're talking about a downturn in the economy. How do you survive when things are falling apart? How do you make sure that you end up being recession-proof? When I go out and talk to people and I say, what do you think you need to do to really nail your career down? Almost everybody says they need to be more business-focused. But Lee says it to me all the time, no one ever got fired for having too many technical skills. We have put such a focus on the business side of security that people are running away from the technology in droves. I even talk to students. A couple of friends of mine are here, and they talk about doing an information security program that's focused almost entirely on business risk rather than the technology. Well, that might be great, but somebody's still got to be there to work the technology. But it's not really about skills. It's not at all about skills.
I mean, one of the things that, whenever we bring people from an interview, or people get concerned about layoffs, the people who are actually doing the work are very rarely affected. It's always the people managing the doers that get affected. Because at the end of the day, you still need the work done, and you can always find somebody with better managerial skills to manage more of the doers. But I think the trick is that if I had $1 for every time I spoke to someone, I say, oh, I'm not into the technology anymore. In the past I used to do that. That to me is almost a death knell of a person from a career perspective. Nobody really expects the chief information security officer to deploy intrusion detection systems or implement firewalls or be monitoring the security event management platforms. But they do expect the chief information security officer to be able to communicate, to be able to lead, and to be able to be respected by the people who are doing those functions so they truly become an effective leader. And I think that that's really what comes down to, is that you have to understand that security, as we know it, is a broad skill set made up of so many small skill sets. And the more of those smaller skill sets that you could put your finger on and you can be able to address, cultivate, and know when the time comes, you're going to encounter an expert and they're going to say, oh, wow, you know what? The Chief Information Security Officer knows where I'm coming from. And at that point in time, you're going to garner that respect within your organizations.
Right. Notice everything that Lee talked about there. It's all about maintaining your own skill set. And this is rule number one. Unfortunately for each of you, so I always like to digress and start talking about my parents at this point. Because in my parents' generation, you came out of school and you looked to find a good job at a company that you would stay at for the rest of your life. The goal was, my mom worked for a single bank for 26 years. And that bank managed her career. Her boss told her what trainings to take. Her boss told her, when she was ready to move up to the next level, when she was ready to make more money, and that was how your career worked. Career management was very much implemented by the firm that you worked for. And with a very few exceptions, that just doesn't exist anymore. We're in a situation, especially in security, because it's so fast-moving, where, I hate to tell you, it's all up to each of you to manage your own career, because nobody's going to do it for you. It's just not going to happen. You have to take the responsibility to make it happen.
I mean, when you talk about responsibility, well, what does that mean? You know, I often tell people when they work with my company that we're basically serve as your guide to your interview processes. That once you really get the job that you've been striving for, getting the job is really the start point. It's really what you make of that job and what you make of that opportunity. And really, when it comes down to it, you're the one that has to actually take that position and turn it into what you're able to turn it into. And if that means communicating with people in a different way, if that means understanding office politics. I mean, so many times people go, oh, well, the politics of this organization just they don't work for me. Well, politics and ethics are two different things. You have to find a way to work within the framework of the rules that the game is played in. I listened to a gentleman up here, I believe from Brandeis University, and he says, well, earlier today, I forgot his name, but he said something very unique. He said, it's our job as a corporation to teach people to think our way. I thought that was a very interesting concept to hear, is that that's from a leader talking about how we're talking about groupthink or corporate think. Well, within those corporate thinking type cultures, there is a demand for uniqueness. But it has to be uniqueness played within the parameters of the rules that have been set forth. So I think that when I'm, you know, in a nutshell, you have to take ownership. You have to be able to map out what you want to do. You have to start talking about long-term goals and start figuring out the skills that are going to be able to get you to where you need to be. And then you have to figure out really kind of how do you acquire those skills? How do you perfect the skills that you do have? How do you develop the skills that you don't have? How do you analyze your strengths? How do you figure out your weaknesses? And figuring out kind of what type of roadmap that I have to get to where I need to be.
And when we start talking about skills, it's not just about your technical skills. And this is the mistake that we as an industry make, and we'll talk about certifications more later, but we as an industry spend far too much time trying to figure out what technical skills we need. Okay, well, I need to go learn this, or I need to go learn that. There are multiple different types of skills, as Lee was mentioning. Within an organization, there is the skill to fit in, and that is a skill. That's a skill that you can develop. I worked at an organization at a point in my career where I very clearly did not fit the culture. And it was up to me to make one of two decisions. And this is where the difference between politics and ethics comes in. Did I want to fit in, or did I want to go somewhere else? And there wasn't a third choice. The third choice we often try to make is, oh, I'll change the organization to be like me. Not going to happen. You know, even someone as radical as me around all of this knows that if you have an organization that's committed to doing one thing, your choice is to fit in or to not be there. There is no third option. But on to strengths and weaknesses for a second.
I mean, you know, it's, I guess, the theories of evolution. You know, it's either adapt or die. I mean, you know, there are three skills that, you know, people have. You know, you either have a strength, you have something that you can define as a weakness that becomes a hurdle or an obstacle that might prohibit you getting you where you want to be, and then identifying weaknesses that, you know, traditionally don't matter. You know, in my job, it's very important for me to have a good, broad understanding of the industry. It's very important for me to understand organizational culture. I have to really understand what skills people possess, but I don't have to be a coder. I don't have to be a network engineer to understand from listening to other network security folks if they do know what they're talking about or they don't know what they're talking about. You always have to figure out what's really important to you. And you start talking about, you know, how do I build my skills? And a lot of those skills could be within your industry, and some of those skills can be outside. I think that, you know, we always talk about this when we do a talk, and how many people in the audience, just by a show of hands, I know people hate this stuff, but by a show of hands, how many people think that they're good communicators? How many people think that the people that they work with are good communicators? It's
About half.
about half, right? I mean, a lot of times people talk about being good negotiators or just being good speechwriters or whatever it might be, is that all those skills have to be worked out. Communication becomes a skill. Presentations are a skill. Technology is a skill. You have to figure out which skills are necessary for you to develop to help you achieve whatever you've set forth for yourself as initiative. And a lot of times, you know, in organizations, what happens is to get into the door or to get invited to the party is that you have to have one or two really good areas of strength. Because I always define successful recruiting is that the corporation gets something that they need and the candidate gets something that they want. And when those things kind of intersect with each other, you traditionally have a very happy customer and you have a very happy candidate. And that traditionally lays the groundwork for a long, successful career at a company. But you have to figure those things out. There's no magic bullet. Whatever you figure out for yourself is going to be truly unique. And having that uniqueness, or, you know, Mike has a slide about weirdness quotient. Having that uniqueness is just very important because you know you. And Mike's saying, you know thyself. I mean, knowing what makes you tick, you know, being yourself, understanding where you sit with an organization, being yourself during an interview, being yourself during those preliminary discussions. If they don't like you because you're older or because of your beliefs or because of your education or because of your lack of experience, it's better for you to know that before you start something than after you're there for 6 weeks and you've committed yourself to something. Be yourself when you go out there. I think that's just so important. I think people they get so involved with trying to please everybody else, and they look at their deficiencies as just from a they look at their deficiencies as areas of such weakness, and they become so critical of themselves that they forget that after this interviews are over, after everything settles, you have to work there. You have to wake up every morning, put on your socks, put on your shoes, and go to work there. And I think that you have to understand when you move to these organizations, where do you want to be? How will this organization help me get where I want to be and will provide me a framework where I can develop my skills, I can hone my skills, and get to where I personally want to get to?
I have to digress and tell a story for a second, because Lee just brought up a point that made me think of it. And some of you in this room have either worked with me or interviewed with me at different times. One of the things, and my wife's in the audience, and she's an HR consultant, so she actually indoctrinated me on this one, but one of the things that drives me the most nuts when I'm interviewing for a position is that interview face. You know, it's almost like the sales guy, like, hi, I'm perfect. Let me join your team. And they hide all their weaknesses. You know what? I want to know what a person's weaknesses are. Nobody's that perfect. Nobody's so perfect that every time I ask them a question, they have the perfect polished answer and never say, You know, that just so you know, if you're interviewing someone and they don't say they're either a public speaker or they've practiced that answer so many times that you need to ask a different question because you're not actually talking to them, you're talking to some book they read. And so many people do that, and it drives me absolutely insane because it's not who you really are. You know what? If you and I aren't going to like each other in the interview, you're certainly not going to like working with me. And that's the mistake that I think a lot of us make. So
I always tell people it's you know, when you tell a story, if you're telling the truth, it's always a very easy story to tell. You know, I think that what's an interesting point is that there are a lot of folks in this room that have sat on both sides of the desk. I mean, of course, I think we've all interviewed for a job at some point in our lives. At the same point in time, we've also interviewed others to come work for us. And I think that a lot of times as hiring folks, people stick to some sort of job description or they stick to some sort of skill matrix that they're figuring out, as opposed to looking at the person and saying, you know what, does this person have some of those extra qualities capable of developing and growing. I mean, I had a client the other day that rejected a gentleman because 10 years ago they worked for somebody, they had a point in common that they just had different experiences working with that one person. And I said I was very naive to think that people don't change in 10 years. I mean, think about it, 10 years. Lee Kushner as a recruiter when he was 25 is a lot different than Lee Kushner as a recruiter when he's 35 years old. People mature, and you have to start betting on people. And when you're out there and you're sitting and you're talking about where you're going, try to focus on the things that you can show about yourself as a person, in addition to all the hard skills. All that gray area about who you are, what you believe in, your ethics, your morals, how you actually communicate with folks, all those things that you can never quantify on a resume. Those are things that are very important. Those are the things that you have to develop on your own. So when that time comes and it's you and the other person, they look at you and they say, wow, you know what, I really like working with that person.
And I would go a step further. I would say that that's what matters more than anything. Because ultimately, the third rule, and to me the most important one, is that you're really nobody until somebody knows you. And I'm going to talk about the cheesy term, if I can get the slide to change, personal branding. And I hate the term, I really do, because it sounds so fake. It sounds like I'm going to go out and turn myself into Tide or Coca-Cola. But a brand is really just another way of saying what people think of when they think of you. You know, I have a brand. And it's not because I'm up on this stage. You have a brand too. You know, if you look at the list I put on there, think of each of those people. Think of Oprah Winfrey. What do you think of first? And think of Barry Bonds. What's the first word that comes to mind? Yeah. How has his brand changed in the last 5 years? 5 years ago, if I had said that, the answer would have been amazing hitter, or fantastic player, or, you know, sits in a leather...
Home run king.
What?
Home run king.
Oh, I was going to say sits in a leather chair in the clubhouse.
Okay, there you go.
But, you know, if you think about each of those people, they have the answer to that question. Well, unfortunately for you, so do you. Everybody has that friend who's that guy who's always late. I know amongst my friends, I'm probably that guy who's really busy all the time because I take on way too much. I saw a couple of smiles there. You have a brand. Ask around. Go to your 3 closest friends. Go to your parents. Go to the people around you and say, what do you think of when you think of me? I actually did a really neat experiment a few weeks ago. I was on LinkedIn, and I got in a discussion with a friend about LinkedIn. And so I asked people that I really trusted and respected for endorsements on LinkedIn, not so that I could put them up on my profile and be all Mr. Cool about it, but so that I could hear from all of my friends what they really thought of me. Because it's a neat place that you can go and ask people what they really think. There's another tool, I'm going to digress. There's another tool that you can go to, and it's at William Aruta's website, and I don't remember the name of the tool off the top of my head. I'm sure one of the 2 live bloggers can find the name of the tool and put it in the blog notes. But basically what it is, it's called 360 Reach. It's a personal 360 assessment. You put in all of your friends' email addresses, and it spams them and basically says, what do you think of me? And I did that last year. It's a fascinating thing to get anonymous answers from everyone you know about what they really think of you. Wakes you up a little bit. So, all right. I've been talking about branding. That was 3 slides on branding. Almost everything I was talking about had nothing to do with tools, although I talked about tools, but every single thing that I talked about was all about people. Because your brand is ultimately all the people you know. I love the Tom Peters quote at the bottom of that. Cool friends equals cool you. If you don't feel like you are cool enough, or if you don't feel like you're growing enough, or if you don't feel like you're at the right place in your career, go meet the people who are. Go meet the people who are doing that stuff. Great example, I'm writing a book on social engineering. Like I said, I'm that guy who's too busy. At the same time, as I was doing that, I talked to a friend of mine and told him I was doing this. Well, you guys all saw that show Tiger Team that was on True TV. He introduced me to one of them, and we all went out for drinks last week. I'll tell you, my book went leaps and bounds because I got such cool thoughts, and we all just hung out, and it was one of the most fun nights that I've had in a long time. But that's how you get a brand. You get a brand by knowing the right people. By knowing better people, you learn more things, you grow, and it's just this wonderful cycle. So, how do you get to know more people? Because this is where it gets screwed up by so many people. Has anyone ever been to a professional networking event? Couple of hands. Did it feel like you just walked into a room and everybody ran up to you and threw business cards at you? Because that's what it feels like to me. I go to a networking event and I walk in the room. It's like, hi, let me give you my card. Whoa, gone. That's not what it's about. It's about actually meeting people. And this is where what Lee was saying really comes in. It's about being yourself. It's about making better friends and becoming known by more people. Now, you can do that in a really mass way. You can do that by starting a blog or a podcast. Guess what? You start a blog, and you're anybody but who you are, it won't last very long. You got to be you. And being you, warts and all, spelling mistakes and all, bad grammar and all, that's how you become known by people. This is my favorite quote from the Clue Train Manifesto. It is really, really scary for most people to speak from who they are. Most people have a really hard time just walking into an interview and being them. But you can't trick that. You can't fake it. You have to be who you are. And that's where what Lee was talking about really comes in. You have to be yourself. Hold on. Yeah, go for it.
Going back to blogging, that can be a double-edged sword because if you're not careful about what you say, if you look at search on it, it could come back and haunt you.
Anything in the public domain is fair game. I have a friend who's on the board of directors of the bank, and they just had a CEO search, and he just always talked to me about what would, just ancillary what he would be. And I told him that he was the chief Googling officer. And what he did was all the candidates that were brought in, he was the guy that was responsible for Googling them. And he created files that were fairly thick, and with the executive search firm that they came in, he made them actually refund one of the travel tickets and actually credit their account, which I thought was very strange because they didn't even do enough research to recognize that this person was publicly unhireable based upon their research. And I just thought it was quite interesting that, the public domain, how about this? Facebook and MySpace and, don't think that employers don't do that. It's always, I said it before, but it is always guilt by association. I mean, in our business, I always have an expression in my office that if you find one good person, you will traditionally find 10. If you find one turkey, you will traditionally find 10 turkeys. Normally, smart people like to hang out with other smart people. Normally, people who are professional, mature, and focused normally like to hang out with others like that. When you go to events like this, you observe when you're at like a cocktail party like last night, and different folks gathering with different folks. Most people in general are friendly. I think just by being in the same place with the folks, you kind of got your hand stamped and they let you in through the velvet rope. Because you're there, come away. Whenever you do something, make sure that you meet different people. You might attach yourself to somebody that will help you get introduced to other folks. But the information security community is a friendly place. If you have something to contribute, people welcome that. It's a little bit different than like in the financial community or other scenarios where everything's very secretive.
Let me see if we can do this exercise. I saw this exercise done at a conference I was at one point. How many people in the room would be willing to walk out in the hallway as soon as this is over and just walk up to 5 strangers and meet them. Couple. How many would be willing to have 5 strangers walk up to you and introduce themselves? Everyone. Except the bloggers who are too busy typing. Yeah. There's the trick. There's the trick in what Lee was just talking about. There's almost nobody who would say, I don't really want you to introduce yourself to me. But everyone's it's like a 5th grade dance. Everyone's terrified of walking up and introducing themselves to somebody. We met in an elevator, right? And it's a funny story. At the time, it was something I was working on, because it's going to come as a shock to some of you, I'm a really, really shy person. And I had to work really hard. Back to this skill is not just being technical thing. I had to work really hard on learning not to be shy. And actually, it happened to be at the time that I was really consciously working on this. So I happened to be in the elevator, and he had a black hat badge on, and I'm like, hey, how's it going? And
that's how it happened.
And a lifelong friendship, you know.
I mean, I just hearing what Mike says, I mean, you know, naturally in my business, everybody expects, you know, the recruiter, they're the guys who are throwing out business cards in the world. And, you know, I learned very early in this industry that, maybe this is not really in the industry, but just in life, but, you know, you always wear your reputation like a dirty shirt, you know. I mean, if you, you know, the way it is that people always, you know, once you do something, you start building that brand day one. And in my profession, recruiting, when I started, you know, talking to people about being an information security recruiter, by definition, people were skeptical. So, like, if I could even think about being invited to speak at an event that's going to be part, that the 10-year reunion of Loft Heavy Industries is going, that I'm going to be a part of that event, I think about, you know, all the different hurdles and obstacles and phone conversations and trust that were built through the course of my career that enabled me in my profession to be accepted into a room and into an audience like this. And that was not something that was an overnight thing. And I think that, you know, people, what happens is this: the one constant in people's careers are time. And your relationships generally span the course of time. And people will always remember their interactions with you. And you never know when those paths are really going to collide. I see it a lot in my business. I see it a lot good, and I see it a lot bad. And generally speaking, it's quite funny, because I also have another saying in my office to my recruitment team, is that you all never have to worry about a job. But there are plenty of people that we've spoken to, of course, through their careers that have not always necessarily been nice or cordial or respectful. At the same point in time, when they get laid off, when something bad happens, guess who calls? And I'm not going to say that we treat those folks differently, but it's always good to want to help people, because that's really the core of what we do. To really help people that treat you with the same type of respect that you would want to be treated with if you were on the other side. And I think that really kind of carries over in everything. I think you always tell a lot about people as people, about who they are when they don't need you. Think about that. If somebody doesn't need you, how do you treat them? Vice versa. I'm probably saying it wrong. But the idea is this, is that realize that all your interactions are meaningful, and that you never know where that door will lead to. I just go one completely crazy thing. I met my wife because I sat next to a woman on a plane who introduced me to my wife 10 years ago, 10 years from when we met each other. And that was completely strange. It's changed my life. So
that's how it works. I'm thinking about the next slide, and back to what you were saying about being yourself in the world. As you were talking there, I think we should have just had my grandmother come up and do this whole speech for us, because I was really lucky to get some education early. Honesty is always the best policy. Being who you are is always the best policy. Now, I'm not standing up here saying that if you happen to be Elliot Spitzer that you might have wanted to blog about what was happening in that hotel room. That would be the first thing I wouldn't say. I would say choose your best voice. You know, be that person that you believe you truly are. You know, I don't think most of us believe we're irresponsible. I don't think most of us believe that, you know, we drop balls or we're incompetent. It's that same thing that we just did. You know, how many people think they're a good communicator? Way more than think everybody else is a good communicator. It's the Lake Wobegon thing, where all the children are above average. We all believe we're above average at most of the things that we do, or we wouldn't do them generally. So I wouldn't suggest getting a blog or a podcast or walking into a room like this and being, you know, saying, hey, look at me, this is how I'm a failure. This is how I'm terrible. It's not necessarily the best foot to put forward. But at the same time, I wouldn't say to be somebody who you're not, because that's the surest way to know that you're going to eventually screw it up. I mean, Mark Twain had this great quote about lies, and I don't remember what it was too precisely, but it was something about the more lies you tell, the more things you have to remember. You'll find your life and your brand and your network are so much easier if you just are that person who you are. And now to totally digress to a topic that we both just wanted to rant about, our least favorite question in the industry.
This is always my favorite, the certifications, and people always say, well, what do you think? I mean, I think if I turn back the clock to the late 90s when things were a little bit crazy and monies were flowing and, everybody was going to be the next paper millionaire. I remember when companies were actually giving people money to go out and get certifications. I'm not saying paying for the certifications, but actually giving people bonuses to actually have the certification.
Actually, I got a $5,000 bonus for my CISSP at the time. I was one of those guys.
There you go. And the truth of the matter is that the companies didn't use, the reason that they could justify that is because if they paid people money, they can charge better rates. The more qualified your people are, the better perception of your brand in the marketplace. So when people start using certifications as marketing advantages, I think that's when, if you hold one of those certifications, whichever one it might be, you have to really start questioning the value of what you're holding. One of the things I would tell people is that certifications, education, degrees, anything that you can do that shows that you have a certain level of commitment to your profession, to your own personal career, to your own betterment, is generally a good thing. A lot of times people will say to me, well, will your client pay for certification? The idea of asking somebody else to invest in your own career and then not be willing to do so because you want to, or because you want to learn, or because you want to drive to get yourself, it's almost kind of the antithesis. When people are mercenaries, that everything has to have a what's in it for me quotient, if the certification that you're getting, whether it's a CISSP or a SAN certification or an MBA or whatever it might be, if it doesn't have enough real value to you to reach into your pocket and pay for it on your own, chances are you shouldn't be getting it. It's kind of interesting. Go ahead. I agree with you. I mean, I have clients to this day that say, well, we require the person to have a CISSP. And I said, would you like me to exclude all qualified people who just don't have that certification? And some of them say yes, because some of them have been brainwashed where that certification equals success in their own mind. But the truth of the matter is really, I mean, you know, those are the types of places that no matter what happens, nothing's ever going to change. You could probably tell that, you know, I always tell people that like people hire people who have experiences like them. There's always kind of that vanity approach. If the person's come from consulting, they like people who have consulting backgrounds. If the person's come from a product environment, they want people who've worked with product backgrounds. In fact, one of the things that when Mike and I worked together is, that, you know, the ending of the story is not great, but the gentleman who hired Mike actually became the Chief Information Security Officer at a financial services company, and prior to that, ran a research team. And when he was calling for me to find him a right-hand person, I thought it was very unique that from a career path perspective, that somebody like Mike, who's run a vulnerability research team, this would be a very logical mentorship scenario for Mike to learn from, and then for the mentor to actually teach Mike about what to do in his, you know, in his own way. Unfortunately, the person wound up actually being transitioned away from his position about 3 weeks after Mike began work there, which was unbeknownst to me, and Mike never held it against me, and Melina never held it against me, and I didn't see it coming, whatever. But the truth of the matter is that people like to hire folks like them. So if chances are, if you are a hiring manager who has a CISSP, you'll say, wow, they should be like me. You know, certifications are generally a good thing. You know, you can't ever hold it against somebody for saying, wow, they've tried to improve themselves. But where the rubber meets the road, and I think that's really the most important thing, is that it's really about what you do know. And it's really about what you can communicate. And it's really not so much about the letters that hang next to your name. And if somebody's going to hold it against you because you're not a CISSP, and they're going to hold it against you because you don't have a degree from a fancy university, or you don't have an MBA, or whatever it is, guess what? It's about telling the truth. And you better off to figure that out really up front in the process than figuring it out after you've gone to work there.
Actually,
Your mic's gone?
oh, no, my mic's not gone. I turned
Oh.
it off so I could have a side conversation.
Oh, okay.
I actually wanted to ask Adam a question because I think it's the right person to answer the question. I think this is probably the guy who has the best answer in the room because he's the only person in the room that I know that has a PhD. And this is the reason to get it. Why'd you get it?
To prove I could work on a project for multiple years with no clear end in sight and still reach a goal. I mean, that's really one of the biggest reasons why, was that, you know, someone could say very abstractly, look, here's some goal off in the distance. You need to plan for it, you need to be able to execute on it, you need to do it, and then demonstrate you did it at the end. And it's a multi-year project with minimal support, and can you achieve that? And that was probably the biggest reason why I did it.
And let me comment just in general. I am sure, and you stopped me, Adam and I know each other pretty well, but let me ask you a question. How many people used the fact that you had a PhD as a determining factor about, you know, what things you were good, or how much has you having a PhD really influenced your quote-unquote professional career as opposed to all the things that you've done because you're a dedicated security professional, because you're well respected within the community, because of the, you know, the work that you've done, not in your PhD program, but all the work that you've done outside your PhD program. Sorry. Adam, we'll give you credit. Bloggers, blog Adam.
Honestly, if anything, it could be even a slight detriment having it. The degree means minimal compared to my career experience and my skill set. And if anything, I've had negative reactions from people I worked with who were intimidated because I had a degree, and they said, so what? So you have a PhD, big deal. And that actually was a retort to part of a discussion. So, I mean, in some ways it's a double-edged sword, but it was something I did for myself, and it's not for my, it's not for my career. It's a goal that I had and I wanted to achieve.
Thanks a lot, Adam.
Thanks, man. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, but I knew that you had the right answer to the question. You want to know what certification to get? The one that you want. The one that fits into... Adam's first answer was phenomenal. He knew what he wanted to do with his life. He knew something that he wanted to be able to prove that he could do, which was work on projects and really dedicate himself. And he went and did it. It wasn't because he thought somebody was going to, drool over him because he had a PhD after his name. It was all about his own growth. So the answer to the question, what makes you grow?
Yeah, I have a master's degree that I don't use. I mean, I have a master's degree in sports marketing. I mean, that could probably be like the 180-degree angle from information security. So, I mean, and I got it because at the time in my life it was something I was interested in. So the truth of the matter is that, you really owe it to yourself. And maybe if we can close out, I know that we're kind of running short on time. If you close out is that, your careers are unique to you. You're the one who has to spend 40, 50, 60, 70 hours doing what you do every week. And if you're not really attuned to really wanting to do it, and if you're not doing it because there's something inside you that drives you as a motivator, whether it's knowledge, whether it's finances, whether it's helping other people, however you structure that criteria, you should find things and seek them out that really drive home with you as a person. And chances are, the things that you're really going to be happy with will probably have very little to do with the financial rewards, because the financial rewards that will be attached will come naturally. They'll become because you're doing something that you like, or that you're doing something that you love. The best people in this profession didn't get paid to do the work that they did initially. They did it because it was a labor of love. It's because they wanted the quest for knowledge, the ability to say that I'm smarter than you, whoever you might be. That is something to be respected. And I think that if that continues to drive you, when you do wind up in a competing situation with other people, and you have that and you've driven that, and you've lived it, and you've really built that into your makeup of who you are as a person, at that time when the two of you reach for the same position, you'll be the one that winds up getting it. Because you can't hide all those things. You just can't.
That's fantastic. We've spent a lot of time up here talking about what we wanted to talk about, but the trick about career stuff is it's not like a technical presentation. You guys each have your own careers, and I think we've sort of said it's really individual to each of you. So we'd like to open it up to questions. Yeah, I will. I'll do the audience thing like I did yesterday.
Does anybody have any questions? What's the fastest land animal? The cheetah. No questions?
No questions. Wow. Yeah.
Earlier when you said one thing you look for in an interview to see if someone's being authentic is if they use the word a lot. Going through a couple...
Like that, you're asking a real question.
Yes, yes. One of the things that when I was going through interview process and I was going through interview after interview after interview was I was training myself not to use the word but still be authentic. If I was interviewing with you not using would that...
It's not the only... Let me answer. It's not the only thing.
Next.
Yeah, and I said you can be a good speaker, right? There's lots of people out there who are good at expressing themselves without using the word I have to work really hard not to do it myself. But the whole point is it's an indicator of your practicedness. The worst thing is when... here's the other trick. I do the career talk all the time. I've read most of the interviewing books. I've heard most of the answers. So if I hear like verbatim the answer I read last week, I might ask you what book you read that out of. And here's the trick. As a hiring manager, I'm going to start asking you questions that there's no way have ever been in an interview. Did I ask you 2 questions that you had never heard before? Yeah, but But the point is, as a hiring manager, I try and break people out of their practiced interview questions by asking them questions they couldn't possibly have. So.
Go ahead, Carol.
I think people are filing in for the next one, but I'll let Carol ask hers, and then we can go out in the hallway.
Quick one. You talked about being yourself in the interview, and what if yourself is normally just wearing, cut-off jean shorts and a T-shirt or something like that? You also have to project the fact that you know how to dress in front of a client and how to put on a face. So where's the boundary there?
I think that a great way to answer that is that, know your audience. Like, I had one guy once come to an interview with a bow tie, and it really flipped out the client. Like we don't have anybody who wears a bow tie here. And I'm like, all right, well, I mean, it sounds kind of crazy, but you have to understand the environment that you're walking into. So, one thing that we didn't really talk about is level of sacrifice. Everybody, in whatever they decide to do, one of my favorite expressions is life is a series of trade-offs. So if your trade-off for working at company XYZ and you know that they're a suit and tie culture and you like to wear cutoffs and jeans and, hey, who doesn't, right? I mean, but if you like that and you might not be happy dressing up in a suit, you probably shouldn't go interview there. That really becomes a question of your own. Some people, I have a guy who's a good friend of mine. He wanted to find, even in 2007, he wanted to find an office where he could bring his dog to work. I said, look, man, I don't have any customers that, if they're willing to pay for our services, they ain't letting you bring their dog to work. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. But, I mean, that was something that was important to him. I guess he didn't want to have dog care or whatever it was, and that was a deal breaker. I mean, you just have to outline the things to you that are truly important, create a criteria for yourself, and try to match as many as possible. Because unless we all become independently wealthy or own our own businesses or whatever it is, you have to conform to some sort of rules. And your own tolerance for pain will definitely be unique to you. And I think that really comes down to it, and really finding the right cultural fits within organizations and really going to a place where you really want to work and that you feel that your thoughts really line up with the places that you'll be working at.
Let me jump in with one quick thing, and this is the trick to that. And Lee pretty much said this, but I'm going to try and say it. No, not better. Just in my own way. I had a conversation recently with a friend where we were talking about the difference between something you need and something you want. If you need to wear cutoffs, then blow the interview, because you shouldn't be working there anyway. If you just want to wear cutoffs and it's not a big deal, then wear what is appropriate. It's all about knowing what your deal breakers are and knowing what they aren't. And we are clearly over time with all the people in the room, so I'm going to wrap this up, and feel free to grab either Lee or I with questions. Our email addresses are up there, and thank you for listening.
And also, I just wanted to let everybody know we're here filming the event, and we're filming all 3 tracks, and the DVDs will be for sale out here on this table starting in a couple hours, probably, if you're interested. They're $20 a piece, or if you get 10, then they drop to $10 a piece. So 20 a piece, 10 for 100. People listening on the tape can get them at www.mediaarchives.com.